Hodgepodge, my weekly wrap up of reading, bookish thoughts, booktube stuff, pretty much anything I want to talk about. That's what I do on these Saturdays. As oftentimes happens, I get ideas, things I want to talk about, or topics come up for me in watching YouTube and, watching booktube. And a lot of people have been doing the mid-year book freakout tag. I think that's the title. Most confusing title ever. I've seen a lot of those videos, and a couple of years ago I took exception with the idea that all these people said they didn't get fictional crushes, because I get fictional crushes. I assumed, that everybody got fictional crushes, and they were just lying because they would be embarrassed to talk about fictional crushes. And I kind of define crush as something that doesn't have to be sexual. It's really just, perhaps a feeling that you might be friends with a person who is a fictional character. But, moving on from that, the mid-year booktube freakout tag, or whatever the name of it is, also, though, this year made me think about the question where it asks, the last book that made you cry. And a number of people also, take a pass on this one, that they don't cry when they read books. And this kind of just, this and the fictional crush thing kind of just brought up for me something that comes up from time to time in my mind and thinking, and that is just how different readers are, and how those differences might, explain why we, like books. Some of us like certain books, and some of us don't. So I am one of those people who occasionally a book will make me cry. Now, I'm not usually just like weeping and tears running in my face, but well up, a tear, those kind of things, those do happen to me from time to time. And one of the things I found is that oftentimes those books that inspire that emotion in me are among my favorites. So I just pulled just a few books from my shelf just to talk about briefly that kind of made me cry, and kind of why. First, I chose William Trevor's Reading Turgenev, which I read with Sean a few years ago, and I had read once before, which is kind of just the story of, lost love and a life wasted, and it's just really, really sad and really beautiful. And I think there are moments in this book at which I definitely teared up, and I love the story. I love that novella, and it's one of my favorite things that Trevor's ever written. One of my favorite novels, the novel I oftentimes tell people is the greatest American novel, is Beloved by Toni Morrison. Sethe and her willingness to do what's necessary to protect her family, the remorse, the pain, the damage that's done by those actions, by those decisions, reverberate throughout the book. It is in some ways an allegory. Her story and the story of slavery, as her story as a former slave, kind of is an allegory, I think, for the United States and how we deal with slavery. But I just thought this was really beautiful at moments. There's that moment out in the woods when Sethe confronts Beloved. I just found it to be really powerful and moving. Probably actually one of the books that makes me cry, has made me cry the most often, was Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. If you haven't read this, you really should. As Greg pointed out in his video the other day about the great American novel, this book may be one of those we should put on that list. And I don't want to spoil anything, but there are a number of deaths in this book that kind of escalate in how hard they are to take, but definitely some sad moments. And then just most recently, probably the Jon Fosse's Septology, The Other Name, I Is Another, and A New Name, which I read over the last couple of years, are just incredibly beautiful, powerful evocations of grief and loss and memory, and just there were just moments where I just was like overwhelmed emotionally reading those books. So that happens to me, and oftentimes then those are books that I think are the best books. But obviously, not everybody has that reaction, and therefore I, particularly thinking about the Septology, not everybody had the same reaction as I did. Obviously, it didn't win the Booker Prize this year, or I should actually say, A New Name didn't win the Booker Prize this year. So not everybody had the same reaction, that these books were just, fundamentally great and emotionally powerful. And I, wonder if that is then, one of those things. If you're not one of those people who cries at books or get emotional crushes or have favorite fictional characters, if you don't kind of engage in books on that same emotional level, does that, I assume that makes you more of a plot reader than a character reader, and I assume then you're looking for something in a book that I'm not looking for. So I don't know exactly where we're going to go with this, but I just thought it was kind of interesting, and look forward to any comments you have that can make sense of what I just said down below. I also want to discuss my reading this week. I finished 0 books this week. I'm involved in 2 buddy read kind of read-alongs this month, and I'm reading 2 works of nonfiction at the moment, which are dense and or are slowing down. So let me talk about those books real quick. It is Faulkner in August. You should know this year's Faulkner in August is called The Summer of Snopes. We're reading all 3 books in the Snopes trilogy. In June, we read The Hamlet. July, we're reading The Town. In August, we're reading The Mansion, that follow the rise of Flem Snopes and his family through any kind of means necessary. And it's just been a really good group. It's not too late to join if you've already read these books. If you want to read The Hamlet real quick and get through The Town this month, I'll leave the links to the host below. You can contact them and they can add you to the Voxer group. We'd love to have you. It's great. Or you don't have to join the group, you can just read the books. But anyway, I'm about 90 pages into this, and I'm going to pick this up this weekend and read it. I'm also buddy reading Manhattan Transfer by Jon Passos with Fraser Simon from Fraser Simon Springboard Thought channel. We read the first section this week, which is about 126 pages. You know, for me, as someone, you may know that last summer, I think, or maybe it was 2 summers ago, Jack the Rambling Raconteur and I read the USA trilogy, 1 book a month until we had all 3 finished. And so for me, this is a reread. I've read Manhattan Transfer, but a lot of the story of Manhattan Transfer, a lot of the images from Manhattan Transfer get kind of lost if you've read the USA trilogy. And really one of the things I think is really interesting for me about this book is how clearly it is the forerunner of the USA trilogy. You know, how you can almost see Dos Passos working out his ideas, his modernist style, what he wants to do. And so to me, that makes it really interesting. And it also just really is a very vibrant, you know, if of its age, look at New York as a growing city, as a city of immigrants, as a city of tragedy and possibility, and it really is just, I think, a really good book. You do have to read it with the understanding that it was written in 1925, and it's going to reflect a lot of the values and ideas of 1925. So there are also then 2 nonfiction books that I'm reading as a part of Jane Austen July. I'm reading Jane Austen Alive by Claire Tomilin. I have to admit, it's slow going for me in this book. I'm only on about page 67. If you don't know, Jane Austen didn't leave a tremendous record of her daily activities or of her thoughts. Her sister burned her letters. There aren't a lot of those things. Aren't a lot of like actual documents which can tell us things about Jane, you know, comparatively for a whole life of somebody this important. And so a lot of this is just speculation. And a lot of this is Tomlin, you know, talking about how other families in the area would have done it, or speculating based on what other people might have briefly said about Jane, or making assumptions that certain things which seem like they should have affected Jane in a certain way, which would be reflected in her fiction. And while I can appreciate that, and I think those things are great, and there really is another option with somebody like Jane Austen, for me it's a lot of slow going. I'm not as interested in, you know, Jane Austen's cousin, or all of Jane Austen's brothers, who may or may not have had, you know, a tremendous influence on her life. But you can't, you know, create a book out of, I don't know, 80 letters written to or from Jane Austen or whatever that exists. And so, you know, the book is fleshed out with a lot of that stuff, kind of creating the world and the family in which Jane Austen lived without necessarily giving us a lot of direct and verifiable insight into Jane Austen. It's a good book. I'm not criticizing Tomlin at all, but it has been kind of heavy going. And then just at the end of this week, I started reading Africa's World War, Congo, the Rwandan Genocide, and the Making of a Continental Catastrophe by Gerard, Prunier, which is a history of essentially the catastrophe which took place in sub-Saharan Central Africa and spread almost across the continent in lots of places, beginning with the Rwandan Genocide in the mid-1990s. I'm on page 47 of this book. I don't know if you can see, the print's really small, I'm really old, and it's just a really intricately kind of created story. it is excellent, and it's not that it's not enthralling, it's just taking me a long time to read a page because I'm learning so much as I'm reading. But that's basically what I'm reading. You know, in talking about Manhattan Transfer here by Jon Passos, which I'm rereading, I mentioned that it's a book of its time, 1925, and it reflects the attitudes and ideas of people at time, and that really triggered in my mind something that's also been going on in kind of the comment section of some of my old videos. Have been people kind of accusing me of evaluating whether or not authors in the past, particularly in this case William Faulkner, were racist based on our ideas today. That, you know, it's not fair to judge people in the past based on our ideas of what's right and wrong today. And I accept that there's some truth in that, but the problem with that is, from my point of view, is that the definition of racism really doesn't change over time. You know, a racist is somebody who feels that another group of people are inferior and treats them that way because of that, or they feel that one group of people are superior and therefore should be in a position to make power and or to have power and make rules and decisions. You know, that definition isn't different if we go necessarily back to 1789. It's not the definition of racism that changes, it's the commonality of racism, it's the acceptance of racism that's different. So, you know, I can tell you George Washington was a racist, quite, you know, without any equivocation. George Washington was a racist. He was a slave owner. He clearly did not believe in racial equality. He clearly believed the white race was superior to the race of people from Africa. He was, by any definition, a racist. Just because during his time period racism was widely accepted doesn't mean he's not a racist. It just means that nobody back in the day called him out for being one because so many people were. You know, and therefore a lot of people think, oh, well, we have to forgive these people. They didn't know any better. That really is not true. To say that George Washington didn't know any better is to essentially assume that George Washington lived in a vacuum surrounded only by slave owners, never had any interaction with anybody else, you know, that even his own experience with the people enslaved had not convinced them of their, you know, innate humanity and perhaps, you know, made him question what he was doing. The truth of the matter is all those things are true. You know, he met with people, he knew people who thought slavery was abhorrent. He believed in philosophies which should have led to the conclusion that slavery should be eliminated. In fact, you know, famously Washington frees his slaves upon his death. As said many times, he doesn't free Martha's slaves when he dies, which he could have done because he really considered those slaves to be a living annuity, a living investment. That Martha could always sell slaves and raise money for her upkeep for the rest of her life. That's how he viewed those human beings. That is an inherently racist point of view, and just because it was common during the time period doesn't mean that George Washington wasn't a racist. Now, does that mean I think we should completely cancel everything George Washington did and contributed to the creation of the United States, such as it is? You know, that's up to you, and I'm not telling you that one way or the other, just as I wouldn't tell you just because I believe that William Faulkner was a racist. I wouldn't tell you not to read the works of William Faulkner. Obviously, I do read Faulkner and enjoy him. That, to me, is more up to you. But the definition of racism doesn't really change over time. It's just its acceptance of racism that changes over time. Okay, so then let's see. The last thing I want to talk about is, you know, just mention really briefly that, you know, I do spend a lot of time on YouTube. And recently I discovered a comedian, actress. Her name is Eleanor Morton. I believe she's Scottish. And she does a lot of short videos that are funny. Some of them are laugh out loud funny. They're all kind of amusing, entertaining, and I think in the time period where we live right now, which we're living right now, anything that can cause us to chuckle or smile, I think is definitely worthwhile. So I'm going to leave a link to her channel below, but also to, I think, 3 specific videos that I think are obviously connected to bookish things. One is a book signing with Anne Bronte, where she pretends to be Anne Bronte. Another is where she talks as though she is Mary from Pride and Prejudice, which is topical for Jane Austen July. And then there are 2 videos in which she imagines conversations between J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, which I found to be really funny. Anyway, I hope you enjoy those if you follow those links. Look forward to your comments in the comment section below, and as always, thank you for watching.